I never thought I'd end up working the night shift at a Walmart. Not after everything I went through in the last year, losing my apartment, breaking up with the only girl I'd ever really loved, and watching my bank balance hover in the double digits for weeks, like it was daring me to take a risk. But when you're 26, jobless, and eating instant noodles 3 times a day in your cousin's spare room, pride kinda stops being a factor, you know? The job posting was vague. Night stock associate, immediate hire, must be discreet. And honestly, that last part should have been a red flag. But I told myself it was just Walmart speak for don't steal Tide Pods, and showed up for the interview anyway, which turned out to be just a 10-minute conversation with a man named Mr. Winlow, who never looked up from his clipboard and who kept scratching at his forearm like something was crawling under his skin. He didn't ask me about experience or references or even my availability, just stared at my name tag, muttered, "You'll do," and handed me a folded piece of paper with a big greasy fingerprint on it. I didn't even get a tour of the store. He just told me to come back that night, 10 p.m. sharp, and to read the paper carefully before my shift started. I thought maybe it was a welcome packet or some schedule thing, but when I opened it later that evening, while sitting in the break room with a vending machine sandwich, I realized it was something much stranger. It was a list. A list of 5 rules, typed in bold font, each followed by a short but very specific instruction. And at the top in all caps it said, "These rules are non-negotiable. Break them and you forfeit your employment." I laughed out loud when I read that part, thinking someone in HR had a twisted sense of humor. But I kept reading because, well, it was my first night, and I didn't want to screw anything up. Rule 1 said, "Do not enter aisle 12 between 3:13 a.m. and 3:17 a.m. under any circumstances. If you are already in the aisle at 3:13, leave immediately." That one felt oddly specific, which made it creepier somehow. Rule 2, if you see the cleaning lady after one of me, do not make eye contact. She does not work here. At this point I paused, glanced at the time, and remembered seeing someone pushing a mop when I came in. But I just assumed she was part of the janitorial staff. Rule 3, if a child's toy is found on the floor in the baby aisle after 2 a.m., do not pick it up. Call the floor manager and walk away. Rule 4 was the weirdest yet. If a man in a dark trench coat asks where the pharmacy is, tell him we do not have one. Do not say anything else. Do not ask questions. And finally, Rule 5, the mannequins in the clothing section should not be touched or moved. If one is found outside of its designated area, notify Mr. Winlow and leave the floor immediately. There was no signature, no company logo, just a faded stamp that said, "Night Staff Confidential," and a faint outline of something that looked like teeth. I honestly thought it was some kind of initiation prank, like maybe the night crew liked to haze new hires with creepy fake rules to see if they'd quit. Still, something about the way Winlow had looked at me earlier, that complete lack of expression, and the way he'd handed me the paper like it was made of glass, gave me just enough hesitation to keep the rules folded in my pocket all night. I tried to act normal during my shift, helping organize backstock, refilling shelves, avoiding the clothing section, just because those damn mannequins always weirded me out anyway. But I kept catching myself glancing at the clock, mentally calculating how long until 3:13 a.m., and wondering what the hell could possibly be in aisle 12 that I shouldn't see. The weird thing is, the store didn't feel haunted or spooky or anything, not at first. If anything, it felt too normal, like someone had taken a real Walmart and recreated it from memory, but left out all the imperfections. The shelves were always fully stocked, the lights never flickered, the AC was silent and cool, and the floors were so clean, you'd think nobody ever walked on them. It was too perfect, like the store was trying a little too hard to seem normal. Around midnight, I was restocking the energy drinks near the front when I saw her again, the cleaning lady. Same gray uniform, same dry mop, same vacant expression. She was just standing near the frozen food section, slowly turning her head toward me. Her eyes weren't blank or angry or glowing or anything. They were just tired, deep, exhausted, like she'd been scrubbing floors for 100 years and would never stop. I remembered the rule, don't make eye contact. So I looked down, focused on the cans in my hand, and pretended I hadn't seen her. But as I turned to go back to the stockroom, I swear I heard the sound of her dragging that mop right behind me, even though my footsteps made no sound on the polished floor. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know. At 2:05 a.m., I passed through the baby aisle and saw something lying in the middle of the floor. One of those wind-up toys shaped like a clown playing a drum. It was tapping rhythmically on its own, like someone had just wound it up. Nobody else was in the aisle. No kids, no carts, just that toy sitting there, tapping its drum like it was trying to get my attention. I froze, remembering Rule 3, and instinctively reached for my walkie to call a manager, but it crackled and let out a sound like static and whispering layered together, like dozens of voices speaking in reverse. I backed away slowly, not blinking, and when I turned the corner, the toy stopped playing. I didn't go back. At this point, I was starting to get seriously uncomfortable. These weren't harmless hazing jokes. Something was wrong with this place, and the rules. The rules weren't made up. Around 3 m, I wandered into the break room again, hoping to ride out whatever the hell was supposed to happen at 3:13, and found an old woman sitting at one of the folding tables, staring blankly at a vending machine bag of trail mix she hadn't opened. I stayed in the break room until 3:18. When I came out, the lights in aisle 12 were flickering back to normal, and the air around that part of the store felt wrong, like the moment after a thunderclap, when the pressure in the room changes and your ears haven't caught up yet. There was a girl named Cassie at the register doing inventory who noticed me staring and said, "You're lucky. First-timers usually wander in by accident. Store doesn't always let them out." I didn't respond. I just nodded like I understood, even though I didn't. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. By 6 a.m., the store was humming with that artificial energy it always gets right before opening. Customers would arrive in an hour, families and retirees and coupon hunters, none of them aware that at night this place became something else entirely. As I clocked out, Mr. Winlow passed me by the entrance, nodded once and said, "You followed the rules. Good. Most don't." And just like that, he kept walking. I stood there for a second, then stepped outside into the rising sun, wondering if I'd dreamed the whole thing, but my pocket was still crumpling the rules paper, damp with sweat and torn at the edges where I gripped it too tight. I didn't sleep much that day. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the soft tap of a toy drum echoing in the silence, or the sound of dry mop bristles dragging slowly across the linoleum behind me. And worst of all, I started to wonder, if the rules were real, what happens if I break one? Because something tells me they're not just warnings, they're deals. You follow them, you survive, you break them, and you become part of the night crew. Forever. I should have just quit after that first night, honestly. I should have run and never looked back. But that's the thing about desperation. It makes you justify anything. Even the stuff that keeps you up with your eyes wide open at 4 a.m. So I told myself I was imagining it all, that I was just tired on edge, overthinking some weird internal company jokes that nobody bothered to explain properly. And besides, I really needed that paycheck just enough to get my car fixed and get out of my cousin's place. So I showed up again the next night, trying to push all that aisle 12 crap out of my head, even though the second I stepped inside that store, I felt that same weird pressure in my chest, like the air was heavier in there than outside, like the building was alive and slowly settling into its bones around me. Mr. Winlow didn't say anything to me this time, just handed me a clipboard with my assignments and walked off, muttering something under his breath that sounded like, "Don't linger," which I pretended not to hear. I kept my head down for the first half of the shift, stocking canned goods, breaking down boxes, and avoiding the baby aisle like it had some kind of invisible fence around it. And for a while, things felt, well, not normal, but at least tolerable. Cassie was working again too, and she gave me a nod as she passed by with a box of shampoos, like she was checking to see if I was still around or already eaten by the store or whatever. And I considered asking her what exactly happened to people who broke the rules, but something about the way she moved, fast, efficient, like someone trying not to be seen, made me stay quiet. The weirdness didn't really start until around 2:45 a.m. when I realized one of the floor markers on my sheet was wrong. It had me listed for inventory scanning in aisle 12 at 3 a.m., which immediately sent my heart into overdrive. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe whoever typed up the sheet didn't get the memo about Rule 1. But then I remembered something Cassie had said the night before, that first-timers sometimes wander in, and the store doesn't always let them back out. And I started to wonder if the store wanted me in there. I don't know why, but that thought scared me more than anything else. The idea that the building had a will of its own, that it wasn't just a place, but a thing that watched and learned and waited. I spent the next 20 minutes circling the outer aisles, trying to stay busy, but constantly checking the clock, feeling like a diver waiting for a shark to appear out of the deep. At exactly 3:12, I found myself standing right at the end of aisle 12, the overhead lights casting a cold, pale glow over the rows of soup cans, paper towels, dish soap, and bleach. It looked just like any other aisle, but I swear it felt different, like the air was vibrating just slightly, too low for the ear to catch, but deep enough that my bones were buzzing. I didn't mean to walk in, but I did just a few steps, just to check, like poking a bruise to make sure it still hurts. And that was my first mistake. At 3:13 exactly, the lights above me flickered once and then went completely silent. Not out, not off, just quiet, like they stopped humming, like all the background noise of a store, the coolers, the fans, the buzzing just drained away into nothing. The silence was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat, and then I noticed something else, something impossible. The aisle was longer than it had been a second ago. I turned to look behind me, and the end I'd come from was still visible, still there, but stretched, like someone had grabbed the hallway and pulled both ends outward. The floor tiles looked like they were repeating, like the same faded scuff mark was appearing every 6 feet, and I realized the aisle wasn't just long, it was looping. That's when the smell hit me. Not rot, not death, but breath-warm, wet, sour breath, like something huge was exhaling right over my neck. The shelves on both sides began to creak, ever so slightly, like they were swelling, and then I saw it, the paper towel packages on the left shelf. They were rising and falling, not from a fan, not from airflow, but like lungs, slow and steady. I blinked hard, convinced my mind was messing with me, but it didn't stop. The bleach bottles across from me trembled slightly, the caps shifting with each inhale, and suddenly the whole aisle groaned, just once, deep and low, like a tired animal waking up. I tried to move, to run, but my feet were frozen, not stuck, just paralyzed by a fear I didn't know existed until that moment. And I could feel something else now too, like the floor under me wasn't solid anymore, like it had a pulse. The shelves behind me shifted, just slightly, but enough to catch my attention, cans clinking, boxes sliding, and then I heard whispering. Not words, not English, but a breathy pattern that almost sounded like my name being said backward. I turned in a panic and saw that the aisle behind me had changed. No more soup cans or cleaning supplies. Now the shelves were stacked with rows and rows of teeth. Human teeth, baby teeth, dog teeth. Some yellowed, some fresh. all arranged in neat little piles, glued or embedded directly into the metal-like decorations. I don't know how long I stood there staring, but then something wet dripped onto my shoulder, and I looked up. There was nothing on the ceiling, just darkness, darker than it should have been, like the light above had a shadow hanging over it. And then, slowly, the aisle made a noise again, a sort of inhale, and I felt the wind get pulled toward the shelves like the air was being sucked into the walls. And I realized the aisle wasn't just breathing, it was hungry. I turned and ran, or tried to. The floor moved like a treadmill in reverse, pulling me back no matter how hard I pushed forward. I dropped my clipboard, yanked off my name tag, and screamed something. I don't even remember what, but for some reason in my panic, I shouted my mother's maiden name. The second I did, there was this shudder, like the entire aisle flinched, and suddenly the floor stopped dragging. I lunged forward, sprinted through the last 10 feet, and practically dove into the next aisle over, where the lights flicked back on, and the sound of the store returned like someone had unmuted the world. I collapsed onto the tiles, shaking and gasping, and when I looked back, aisle 12 was back to normal paper towels, dish soap, bleach, no teeth, no breathing, just shelves. I stayed there for a while, trying to convince myself that it hadn't happened, that it was some kind of psychotic break or hallucination or a prank gone horribly wrong. But when Cassie showed up and saw the look on my face, she didn't even ask, just helped me up and said, "It's always worse the second night." I asked her how she knew about the name thing, about yelling my mom's maiden name, and she looked at me like I told her a secret she didn't expect me to know. "That wasn't in the rules," she said quietly. "You didn't read that anywhere. The store told you that." And that's when it really hit me. His place wasn't haunted or cursed or anything as simple as that. It was alive, and worse, it was aware. It learns. It watches. It tests you. I called in sick the next night. Mr. Winlow didn't respond, but someone left a voicemail on my phone with a sound that was just heavy breathing and a low groaning creak, like shelves shifting. I couldn't sleep again, not after what I saw, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt that aisle again, stretching, looping, breathing. I don't know why the store let me out. I don't know why it didn't eat me like it clearly wanted to, but I think it was watching, and I think it's still watching. And the worst part? I know I'm going back. Not because I want to, because I have to. Because part of me, some buried, broken part of me, needs to know what happens on night 3. I didn't want to come back. I really didn't. But by the third night, something strange had already started happening. Like the store had wormed its way into my thoughts, into my routine, into my body. And no matter how many times I told myself I wasn't going to show up, I found myself getting dressed, driving there, walking into those sliding glass doors, like a puppet that didn't know who was pulling the strings anymore. And when I stepped back inside, the air felt warmer than usual, like the store had been waiting for me. And that should have been enough for me to leave again. But I didn't. I just kept going, signed in on the stupid clipboard like everything was normal, even though nothing about this place had ever been normal. And Mr. Winlow didn't even look at me when I passed him in the hallway. He just said in this dead, flat voice, "You're getting promoted if you last tonight," and then kept walking. And I wanted to ask what the hell that meant, but something about the way he said, it made me stop cold. The rules were still stuffed in my pocket, folded and worn now, and even though I had practically memorized them by this point, I found myself checking them again, like some anxious kid rereading a cheat sheet before a test. And that's when I realized something terrifying. There was a new one. It wasn't typed like the rest. It was handwritten in black ink on the back of the paper, like someone had scribbled it in a hurry, and it read, "If he asks again, don't just lie run." That was it. No context, no signature, just that one sentence, and it made my stomach drop because I knew exactly who it meant. The man in the trench coat, the one the original Rule 4 warned about. If he asks you where the pharmacy is, lie. Now apparently, if he asks again, I'm supposed to run. That didn't sound like a mistake. That sounded like an escalation. The shift started off quiet enough. There were fewer employees on that night, maybe 4 or 5 of us total, and nobody spoke much except Cassie, who handed me a box of expired candy bars and told me to toss them in the compactor out back before 2 AMI nodded and took the box, trying to focus on anything other than aisle 12, which I refused to even look at, even though I could feel it like a pressure point just outside my vision, like an itch behind my eyes. I made the trip to the compactor fine, but when I came back inside, the lights near the pharmacy section flickered. Not all of them, just one strip above the waiting chairs. And that's when I saw him. The trench coat man. He wasn't wet this time, not like before. This time, he was bone dry, his coat buttoned up high around his neck, and his hands were tucked into his sleeves, like he was holding something underneath. He didn't look real. I mean, he had a face, sure, but it didn't seem connected to anything underneath, like someone had drawn it on too tightly, like it would peel off if he smiled too hard. And he didn't blink, not once. He just turned toward me slowly and said, in this soft, polite voice, "Could you point me to the pharmacy?" Now every instinct in my body told me to lie. I opened my mouth and said, "We don't have one," just like the rules said, but then he tilted his head to the side, almost like a curious dog, and asked again, "Are you sure?" "I think you do." That's when I remembered the new rule. I should have run. I didn't. I froze. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way he said it, like he already knew the answer, like he wasn't really asking, but giving me a chance to admit it. My voice cracked when I repeated myself, "We don't have one," and then he smiled. Not a normal smile. His lips stretched far too wide, past where lips should go, and I swear I heard skin tear just a little as the corners of his mouth kept going, revealing rows of teeth, not straight, not human, not even animal, just wrong. Some were long, some were round, some looked like little screws, all packed together like they'd been collected. And I was so locked in place, I didn't even breathe until he whispered, "You should have run." The lights above us snapped off, just those in that row, and suddenly the coldest air I've ever felt rushed past me, like he'd opened a door to something that didn't belong here. Behind him, down the hallway near the pharmacy, something moved. Not walked. Moved, slid, crawled. I didn't look long enough to tell. I just ran. I bolted down the main aisle, past frozen foods and electronics, knocking over an entire tower of DVD bins that exploded across the floor. And I didn't stop until I nearly crashed into Cassie, who grabbed me and dragged me into the break room, slamming the door shut behind us and flipping the little bolt on the handle. I was wheezing, panicked, shaking, and she didn't even ask what happened. She just said, "He's early." He wasn't supposed to come again until next week. That's when I realized she knew more than she ever let on. I asked her what he was, who he was, and she said something I still don't understand. He's the oldest customer. He's been shopping here longer than the store's been open. He just forgets that he already bought what he came for. I thought that was some kind of metaphor until she said, "The last guy who told him the truth ended up in the security tapes, even though we never had cameras back then. We still see him sometimes, stuck in a loop, walking the same 20 feet of hallway, over and over, forever." I wanted to throw up. I told her about the new rule on my paper, the one about running, and she got this look on her face, kind of like surprise mixed with pity. "The store's giving you warnings now?" She said quietly, "That's not normal." I asked what that meant, but she wouldn't answer. The rest of the shift, we stayed close. She refused to leave the break room for a full hour, saying, "His presence leaves a stain," and that it needed time to fade, like he left behind some kind of psychic smog that messed with the layout of the store. When we finally stepped out again, everything looked normal. The lights were back on. The pharmacy was closed and locked as usual. But there was something on the floor near the waiting chairs. A plastic Walmart bag, twisted shut like it had been tied in a knot, just sitting there in the middle of the tile. I didn't want to open it. I really didn't. But something about it felt personal, like it was left there for me. I reached down and picked it up with trembling fingers, and when I opened it, I nearly screamed. Inside was hair. Not a wig, hair. Real dark brown strands tangled with what like dried clumps of scalp. And buried underneath, it was a receipt not from a register, but printed on that same greasy paper like the rules page. And all it said was, paid, return denied. I dropped the bag and staggered back, and Cassie just stared at it for a long time before whispering, "He remembers now?" I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to know. I spent the rest of the shift in silence, doing busy work, avoiding any aisle with reflective surfaces, because I swear to God every time I caught my reflection, my mouth looked just a little too wide. When I clocked out, I found a sticky note on my car window. It just said, "Promotion pending." That was 3 nights. 3 nights in a store that feels more like a trap than a place of employment. And the scariest thing isn't the rules or the man or the breathing aisle. It's the way I'm starting to understand the store. Like its logic makes sense to me now. Like I'm sensing with it. Cassie says that's how it starts. That the more you survive, the more it lets you in. And once it lets you all the way in, you never leave again. I didn't think the mannequins would be a problem, not compared to aisle 12 or the trench coat man, or the whispers I kept hearing through the intercom when it was supposed to be off. But that's the thing about this place. You don't get to pick what gets to you, and you don't get to decide what's real or just part of losing your mind. You just deal with whatever horror decides to show up that shift and hope it doesn't follow you home. And for some reason, on my 4th night, it was the mannequins, and now I can't look at a single one without feeling like I'm being studied, remembered, maybe even copied. It started pretty normal, or at least what passes for normal around here. Cassie was already inside when I arrived, sitting near the lockers with a coffee that looked more like mud. And she gave me this look, like she knew something bad was coming, but didn't want to say it out loud. So I just asked her how her night was going, and she shrugged and said, "They moved again." And that was all she said before walking off, leaving me standing there, confused and jittery. I didn't think much of it until about an hour into my shift when I was assigned to tidy up the clothing section, which I had been avoiding religiously ever since reading Rule 5. The mannequins in the clothing section should not be touched or moved. If one is found outside of its designated area, notify Mr. Winlow and leave the floor immediately. I had followed that rule without question, because something about mannequins has always unsettled me, even before this job. Those blank faces, stiff poses, fake eyelashes, and the ones at this Walmart were especially creepy, like their faces were just slightly off, too smooth, too symmetrical, almost like someone tried sculpting a face from memory, but forgot what real people look like. That night, though, there were too many of them. I know that sounds stupid because, of course, there are a lot of mannequins in a clothing section. But I mean, there were too many more than usual, dozens more, all clustered in unnatural positions, like some kind of silent flash mob. Some were posed in normal retail ways, like holding shopping bags or pretending to wave. But others were doing things I had never seen a mannequin do. Before, one had both arms stretched out in front, like it was reaching for something. Another was bent over at the waist, like it was looking under a shelf. And one was kneeling behind a clothing rack, with its head tilted sideways, like it was listening. I knew for a fact these poses weren't from corporate. Mannequins don't kneel, they don't crouch, and they definitely don't face each other in a circle like they're having a goddamn meeting. I tried to ignore it and focus on folding shirts, keeping my back turned to them whenever I could. But I started hearing things, not footsteps exactly, more like the faint thump of hollow plastic shifting behind me every time I turned away. At one point, I caught one of the mannequins at the far end of the aisle, facing the wrong direction. Its head turned a full 180 degrees. But when I looked again, it was normal. And I told myself I was just tired, that maybe someone bumped into it earlier, even though no one else had been near me the whole time. About an hour later, I noticed one of the mannequins, this tall female one in a red blouse, was missing from the end cap. I know she was there earlier because she had this smudge on her cheek that always made her look like she was half smiling, and now she was gone. I didn't want to panic, so I walked calmly through the section, pretending to look for misplaced sweaters, and found her standing near the dressing rooms, just inside the open doorway, like she was about to go in. I told myself maybe someone moved her for a display or something, even though Rule 5 says not to touch them, so who the hell moved her? I backed away slowly, pulled out my phone, and tried calling the front desk to get Mr. Winlow, but all I got was static, except it wasn't regular static. It sounded like breathing, the same kind of slow, shallow inhale I heard in aisle 12, like someone was listening through the phone and waiting for me to say something. I hung up and decided to go find Cassie, but the second I turned the corner, I stopped cold. All the mannequins were gone, every single one of them. The racks were bare, the platforms empty, the glass eyes gone, and that's when the lights flickered and I saw a shape move past the aisle behind me. I didn't run God. I wish I had, but I stayed still, trying to listen, trying to hear footsteps or movement or anything. But there was nothing, just this eerie sense of being watched from all sides. I turned again and saw her red blouse standing about 10 feet from me, facing directly toward me now. Her head was slightly tilted. Her hand was lifted, palm up, like she was waiting for me to give her something. My legs finally started working, and I booked it toward the break room, nearly tripping over a rolling rack someone had left out. And as I turned into the hallway, I passed another mannequin, different one, wearing a yellow raincoat, standing perfectly still right outside the manager's office. Its head was bent so low, its chin touched its chest, like it was ashamed. When I got into the break room, Cassie was gone. The lights were out in there too, except for the flicker of the vending machine screen. And I sat down, hands shaking, trying to breathe, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. That's when I heard the knock. 3 slow taps, not on the door, on the window. The tiny, waist-level break room window that looked out toward the back exit. I stood up slowly, walked to it, and looked outside. Nothing, just the dark parking lot and the yellow light above the dumpster. Then I looked down. She was there. Red blouse, kneeling. Hands pressed flat to the glass. Her face was tilted up, nose nearly touching the window. Her eyes, God, her eyes weren't painted anymore. They were real, bloodshot, wet, and blinking. I screamed and stumbled back, knocking over the plastic chair behind me, and when I looked again, she was gone. I didn't finish my shift. I hid in the restroom for an hour until sunrise, then ran to my car and drove home without clocking out. When I got there, I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blank, unblinking faces standing around me, slowly getting closer, slowly shifting their arms into reaching positions. The next morning I got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo of my living room window with a shadow standing behind the glass. I was done, I swear to God. I was ready to walk away from it all. From the damn rules, from aisle 12, from the mannequins that blinked when you weren't looking, from that trench coat man with a jaw that unhinged like a broken cabinet, from this entire cursed Walmart. My plan was simple. Clock in, fake a migraine, and walk out the front door forever. No goodbyes. No, it's been real. No 2 weeks' notice. I wasn't going to be the hero. I wasn't going to be brave. I was just going to leave and never look back. But the second I stepped past the sliding glass entrance that night, something felt off. It didn't swish open like usual, it groaned, like metal scraping against metal, and the lights inside didn't hum. They hissed. Mr. Winlow was already waiting behind customer service, tapping a pen on a stack of forms, smiling like he knew I was going to quit. I didn't even say anything. He just pushed a piece of paper toward me and said, "Go ahead and sign, Ethan. Let's make it official." I didn't ask how he knew. I just signed it, too tired to argue, thinking maybe it was a termination form or some HR junk. He took the pen from my hand and whispered, "Congratulations. You've been promoted to permanent night staff." I laughed because it sounded like a joke, but he didn't laugh with me. Then he walked off, whistling, disappearing down the electronics aisle, like he'd never existed in the first place. I turned to leave, but the front doors wouldn't open. They just stared at me, flat glass, no motion. I waved my arms, kicked the sensor panel, pulled at the handles like an idiot, but nothing worked. That's when I started to feel something strange, a sensation in my gut, like gravity was turning the wrong way. I backed up and ran toward the door, thinking I'd bust through it like in the movies. But the second I touched the glass, everything blinked, the entire store blinked, and suddenly I was in aisle 12. I didn't walk there. I didn't turn. I didn't even know I'd moved. I just blinked and boom, aisle 12, staring down rows of cereal boxes that whispered under their breath. I turned to walk out, but the aisle stretched longer and longer the more I walked. It felt like the shelves were breathing again, like they were alive, and the air smelled like copper and plastic and something sweet rotting. I screamed, I begged, I ran, but I always ended back where I started. Then I saw Cassie. She was by the frozen food section, but the lights above her flickered like she was under a strobe light. She was pale, soaked, her uniform hanging off her like wet paper. "You shouldn't have signed," she said, and her voice echoed twice. "We never quit. The store keeps us on discount." I don't even know what that means. But she turned around and disappeared through the wall of the break room like she wasn't even real. I sat there alone for I don't know how long. Hours? Days? The clocks didn't tick. My watch kept blinking, 12 a.m., no matter how many times I tapped it. The soda machine in the back kept cycling through the same 3 ads. The mannequins were standing in a circle near the garden center, heads tilted inward like they were praying. I was going insane. I know I was. I screamed into the walkie-talkie. I flipped the breaker in the stockroom. I even tried to write help in duct tape across the security monitors. But every time I turned around, someone had undone it. The final straw was when I saw myself on the monitor, just standing there only. It wasn't quite me. It was my face, yeah, but the eyes were wrong. Glassy, hollow, like a doll. That's when I realized I wasn't going to leave. Not really. I joined the others, the ones who stopped clocking out, the ones who stocked shelves that never emptied, the ones who sweep floors with no dust. Every night now, I go through the motions. I restock aisle 12, even though it resets every time. I wipe down the pharmacy counter, even though no one comes in. I fold shirts that the mannequins unfold again when I blink. And I've stopped asking questions. Because if you ask too many questions, you end up like the guy in Toys. He talks to the dolls now. They talk back. Sometimes customers come in late at night, real ones. I think, I wave, I smile. They don't see me. They never do. And when I look into the convex mirror above register 7, I see my face again. Still me, still Ethan, but my name tag? It's blank, just a barcode, just another item on the shelf.